a judgment which is the result of an unfair procedure is a thing writ in water from which nothing can follow. In relation to a verdict by a jury which one could not be confident was an unprejudiced jury.
World boss, Vybz Kartel trial at the Privy Council begin yesterday. You know what? Let's get into this story. Welcome to Jet. So first and foremost, before we get into this an ending saga, give thanks to Yahweh and to Yahshua. And while you are hot hit, why not touch the like button, smash the subscribe button and touch up the bell. Before you forget, yes man, I am part of the Jet team. So I am delivering today's story. So Kartel appeal started yesterday. Here are some of the highlights.
Discharge the jury, because it's by doing that that the regard of the jury is in one sense preserved, and explains why discharging the jury is not that uncommon, we would submit, and that's that discharging the jury in the right circumstances prevents people having to then exercise appeal rights. Jury direction can be important ways of keeping a trial on track. The fundamental problem, though, in this case, there are two fundamental problems that explain why jury directions, even if they had been in stronger terms than the ones in this case, would not have been enough. And the two fundamental problems are this. Firstly, it goes back to a point I made this morning. One of the jurors had already been willing to offer bribes. He was willing to break the law. Directions assume that the juror will comply with what they're being told. But if a juror is willing to demonstrate that they are willing to break their oath, willing to act unlawfully, directions cannot solve that in our submission. Implicit in Putnam is the need to know how far the poison has spread, to use the language of Putnam, before giving a direction, because directions will only work if the poison hasn't spread too far or hasn't become too deeply embedded in individuals' thought-making process. Here, because of the limited information about what had actually occurred, in our submission, there was no way of knowing whether the directions were sufficient. And that's one of the reasons why questioning the jury can be important. All that was said in this case, of course, was that the jury were reminded of their oath. Smith, I won't take you to it, but it's 7671, House of Lords at para 24, makes it clear that directions need to be apposite, clear and emphatic. They were not in this case.
What follows from that is the opportunity would have been lost for the appellants, if questioned, or to say, well, this is not true, and then the judge would have made an informed decision. We have no way of knowing but to speculate how much conversations outside of that would have gone to the other jurors. Then, moving back to the next inquiry number 3, it is the same forewoman, and more conversations about her role, and so the taint or the poison would have gone back as far as November in a 65-day trial and before juror number 11 left. So a proper inquiry could have found out, especially in a space where we do not know at what point or if any, when it is exactly for the judge to make an informed decision.
So very clear direction right at the beginning: decide in accordance with your oath, don't speak to anyone whatsoever, and that's, you see, in the two references I give there. And then in paragraph 67 we give various other references. Every time he sends the jury out, he reminds them in terms: do not talk to anyone, you have a very serious function to perform, don't go and mess everything up now. I say this is important, my lords, my lady, I say this is important because after 56 days, the jury would have been well aware of the seriousness of their task, and that they must not talk to anyone, and they must decide in accordance with the evidence. But over time, he recognised that, okay, fine, before he started going to these persons and telling them that, listen, this is what we need to do, I would say, you are listening to the evidence. He said, no, we just need to let go de men, again, them. So, we speak today, he said to me, that's what we need to do. And he says she says the conversation went on for 5 minutes, and she repeats the £500,000 figure. So the first thing he does is tell the jurors, after the break, which everyone knows what it's going to be about, first thing he says, decide in accordance with your oath. In my submission, economy sometimes, just making the main point, is the best course. And this, in my submission, is a perfectly reasonable course for the judge to adopt, because everyone knows what he means by this. Now, I mentioned the point about Shane Williams being acquitted. That, in my submission, is not an insignificant point. Was the judge obliged to discharge the jury? Did he have to? Did he have no real choice as a matter of law? Second issue is, if he was not obliged to discharge the jury, was the procedure he followed sufficient to ensure that all the defendants received a fair trial? 10 jurors, the non-bribing juror, the other 10 jurors would consciously or unconsciously be prejudiced by their knowledge of the offers of bribes, prejudiced against all the defendants, regardless of the directions that he had given, or indeed could give.
There's a real risk that they might have become consciously or unconsciously prejudiced.
Real risk they might have become. That's why, forgive me, my lord, I was trying to go by the Putnam test, consciously or unconsciously. Is that something which was going to be in the back of their minds? Now, on the first question, namely, you've got one rotten apple here, so that's it. We say that can't be right, but nonetheless in the defendant's interest to derail a trial. And I submit that's an important point, and I submit it also goes to the whole jury system. And it will bring the jury system into disrepute in a case such as this. If the position is really this, there are 10 innocent jurors who have performed their duty, let's assume for the moment, who have performed their duty without any shred of bias. It would bring the system into disrepute if the verdict is nonetheless to be set aside because of the one bad juror.
But the normal scenario would be that, of course, you'd get rid of that juror.
I agree. The difficulty here...
I mean, you wouldn't say, well, you can carry on with that juror.
But, my lord, again...
But what I'm saying is the quote from paragraph 31 leads us to the obvious result that, of course, a juror who's refusing to obey directions has to go.
He has to go. Well,
that doesn't then follow that, oh, you can leave him on.
No. Subject to one point, what I call the waiver point. And the prosecution here, it is, as they pointed out, they're the losers in this. And they are prepared...
How can you be sure? You just don't know. You don't know.
Well, my lady, funny enough, we do know in one sense, because it was a 10-1 verdict, and we know from evidence acquired afterwards that you-know-who was the one. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And that was a matter of witness evidence obtained by, funny enough, the defence afterwards.
Yes, but if there's a... Well, I think one doesn't know how people may react to an attempt to bribe them. If the jurors thought that an attempt was being made to bribe them on behalf of the defendants, then that might have who knows, it could have inclined them to dig their heels in and prejudice them against the defendants.
My lord, I agree. That of course, is the second question. I'm just on the first question for the moment. Can I, namely, there was just a rotten juror. Does that of itself mean the verdict cannot stand? And can I give you an example where I submit it is not of itself a sufficient reason? Supposing what happens is this. A jury comes in with, let's say, a 10-1 verdict. The one has been bribed, but the one has not revealed that to anyone else. It all comes down after the trial. Can the defendant come along after and say, oh, dear, there was a rotten juror on that, he didn't tell anyone about it, but nonetheless Nevertheless, the verdict must be set aside because there was just one, as well, there was one person who wasn't performing his duty, qua juror. My submission would be that would receive short shrift from the appellate court. It would say, well, the rotten juror didn't speak to anyone, he didn't obey his duty, he did come in with a not guilty verdict because he'd been bribed, but on the other hand, that made no difference whatsoever to the 10 who did come in with a guilty verdict. We know it didn't, because he didn't even mention it. Now, in those circumstances, I submit the verdict would stand. And I simply give that as an example as to why what you might call the pure point. There have to be 11 good jurors, even when there's a 10-1 verdict and the 10 are good. There have to be 11, and the whole thing falls to pieces. Cannot be right. And I submit that, in the example I've given, that would give rise to very considerable public concern.
But the trouble is, we don't know.
I've got to have that.
We're not supposed to know.
Well, I know we're not.
Who's saying what in the jury room? So you can never. So the hypothetical you've given can never arise in reality.
Well, my lord, I hesitate to disagree, but I would say that it could arise, and indeed, in this case, we do know precisely what happened.
Yeah.
So what is your view? Do you believe Kartel will bust the case and be freed? Or do you think it's 50-50? Write your comment below, man, and let's have a discussion about this. For those of you who forget to subscribe, ensure please touch the like button, smash the subscribe button, and touch up the bell before you forget. So here we are going now. We're going to jet off, you know.